Hazak u'Baruch. Good morning, Morai v'Rabotai. Be'ezrat Hashem, Mincha is going to be 6:55. The learning today is sponsored Leilui Nishmat Gabriel ben Esther, sponsored by his family, and also Leilui Nishmat Yosef HaKohen ben Brucha Zilpat bat Devoraz Sveta Sarah bat Berucha, sponsored by the Chodjiev brothers. Further sponsorships, please contact Rabbi Babayev. We also like to mention that tonight is going to be the annual Women's Shiur in the Young Israel at 7:45, run by the Sisterhood. I'm going to be giving the shiur. Please remind your wives to participate, and Be'ezrat Hashem, there's going to be a discussion of the halachot, as well as outlook and perspective in terms of Pesach and the days beyond. The halakha tells us, as we were discussing yesterday, that there's a big distinction between writing that's done permanently and writing that's done temporarily. Permanent writing is asur from the Torah. And temporary writing, for example, writing like we mentioned that a person writes on the window where there's a little bit of condensation and he writes letters, that is still asur, but is asur on a rabbinic level. Or if he writes on sand, which is not going to last, that's asur on a rabbinic level. So how do we define the parameters of what's considered permanent and what's considered temporary? The halakha is that permanent means permanent. It means for the rest of time, be'etzim. It inherently will last tamid, always. However, temporary is not good enough for it to be just for that Shabbat. Something lasts just for Shabbat, that's not the definition of permanency. It has to be much more than that. And therefore, if it's just for the period of Shabbat, that's called temporary. One of the examples, I remember this used to be very common, I'm sure it's still pretty much in existence, but they used to have pens that they had ink, and the ink would last maybe a few minutes, and then it would disappear. And that, of course, would be considered to be temporary. Now, that doesn't mean to say that it's mutar, it's still not allowed, but it is taking a different form. It's going to be a yisur de rabbanan, and not a yisur de oraita. And even if it were to last for a few hours, or for the entirety of the Shabbat, it still would be defined as temporary and not as permanent, and would be asur on a rabbinic level. Baruch Adonai.